They say Virginia keeps its ghosts close to the earth, but sometimes the ghosts are still alive. In the summer of 1879, in the shadowed hills of Beaufort County, a family secret twisted itself into something so unnatural the county clerk refused to write it down. A patriarch, a man of the Bible, the land and bloodline, took his own mother as his wife after her husband's death. The records that survived, few and torn, call it a matter of inheritance. But those who remembered, those who whispered in the dark, called it a curse. This story isn't about love. It's about the rot that grows when blood refuses to let go of itself, when a man sees in his mother not a parent, but a mirror of the life he cannot control. The patriarch's name was Ephraim Hale. His mother, Mary Ann Hale, was 34 years older than him, a stern, quiet woman who had buried 2 infants, 3 brothers, and her husband, Joseph Hale, who died in late 1878. Ephraim was his only surviving son, a man already hardened by war, drought, and debt. By the time of Joseph's burial, Ephraim had taken control of the farm, the livestock, and the house that his father built. The neighbors said he stopped speaking to anyone who wasn't blood. His mother, still mourning, stayed with him out of necessity. But something changed in that house, something neither the preacher nor the sheriff could explain when they were later called. It began with a notice in the Fincastle Herald, small and unassuming: Ephraim Hale, 41, to wed Mrs. Mary A. Hale, 75. The typesetter reportedly refused to print it twice. The courthouse clerk left the marital register half blank, handwriting faint, as if ashamed. But there was a witness. Her name was Clara Poole, a midwife and family friend, who years later, near her own death, claimed she'd seen them standing together before the judge. Ephraim with his hand on his mother's shoulder, calm, proud, like a man signing a deed. Mary's eyes, she said, were empty, like she'd already gone somewhere else. It was said the night they returned home, every clock in that house stopped. The neighbors never spoke of that night in full sentences. They'd trade fragments instead. Pieces of rumor and nightmare passed through generations, as though even the memory itself might be contagious. A child of the valley once wrote in a letter, decades later, the Hale house was quiet, but the quiet was alive. Ephraim sealed the doors. The front porch, where his father once whittled and read scripture, became overgrown with vines, and the chimney began to lean as though the earth itself rejected the house. Mary was rarely seen again. When she was, it was always from a distance, standing at the upstairs window, a white shape in a black frame. She didn't move much. Some thought she was praying. Others said she was waiting for someone to come and undo what had been done. The local minister, Reverend Stokes, tried to intervene. He rode out to the Hale property with his Bible and a bottle of communion wine. But when he returned, he told his wife never to ask about it again. "That man," he said, "has built a temple to his own sin." The next Sunday, Stokes' sermon was about Lot's daughters and the destruction of Sodom. No one missed the message. Ephraim didn't attend church again after that. He sent letters, those strange ones, to the courthouse, to the bank, to his dead father's cousin in Richmond, always signed the same way: Ephraim Hale, son and husband. By autumn, the crops had failed. The livestock either ran off or starved, yet somehow Ephraim was seen walking the property lines every morning, tall and stiff, as if inspecting an invisible army. Some believed he was losing his mind. Others said it wasn't madness, it was devotion. One night, a farmhand named Ben Sutter swore he heard 2 voices in the barn. One was Ephraim's, the other, softer, broken, yet strangely childlike. He said it wasn't Mary's voice. Not anymore. He quit the next day and moved 3 counties over. When asked why, he said, "There's something in that house pretending to be family." The Hales stopped aging in people's stories after that. Their image froze in time, 2 silhouettes behind warped glass, lit by a single candle that never seemed to burn out. In January of 1880, the snow came early and stayed longer than anyone could remember. The Hale farm vanished under white silence. Smoke rose from the chimney only twice that winter, and each time it carried a strange smell, wheat, burnt, metallic. When the thaw came, the mailman found Ephraim's letters stacked on the porch, unopened, stiff with ice. He said he knocked, heard nothing, and left them there, for the living or the dead, whichever answered first. The first to break the silence was Clara Poole again. She was the only one brave, or foolish, enough to step inside the house when weeks had passed without word. She told the sheriff if she found every door locked except one, the upstairs room where the curtains never opened. Inside, she found 2 chairs facing each other, a Bible split open between them, and 2 plates set with rotted bread. There were footprints in the dust, but only one set was fresh. Ephraim appeared days later in town, pale, slow, moving, wearing his father's old overcoat. He went to the courthouse, signed something no one was allowed to see, and walked back home without speaking to a soul. The clerk who handled the paper said his hands shook so badly he spilled ink across the document, and when he looked down, Ephraim was already gone. Months passed before the truth, or what people claimed was truth, came crawling out. A hunter found Mary's body by the riverbank, half covered in reeds. She'd been dressed in white linen, as if for burial, but there was no grave nearby. Her wedding ring was gone, and her eyes were open. Ephraim didn't flee, he didn't hide. He told the sheriff she'd asked to go home, and he'd only done what a husband should. They never arrested him. The judge said the law had no language for a crime like that. "It ain't murder," he muttered. "It ain't right, but it ain't murder." After that, Ephraim sealed himself inside again. He stopped tending the fields, stopped lighting the hearth. He just wrote. Pages and pages, bound together with twine, full of strange reflections. Some called them sermons, others confessions. The last page ever found read-only. Blood remembers itself, even when we forget what it means. By the fall of 1881, the Hale farm had become a wound on the county map, untended, unloved, and avoided even by the desperate. The trees leaned inward as if whispering among themselves. Travelers reported hearing hymns in the wind, faint, always off key, like someone singing with a mouth full of dirt. The sheriff eventually ordered the house to be checked, but when his men went up the hill, none of them crossed the gate. They said the ground felt wrong beneath their boots, soft and trembling, as though something beneath was breathing. Only one deputy, an older man named Elisha Ward, forced himself to go in. He lasted 20 minutes before running out pale as milk. He never said what he saw, but when asked, he muttered, "She's still there." He made her stay. For years, the land changed hands. Families tried to rebuild, but each one left within months. One farmer claimed the well water tasted like rust and ashes. Another said every night around midnight, the porch creaked like someone pacing. The Hale family Bible was found buried under the floorboards in 1890, its pages fused together by moisture. The inside cover had new writing, carved deep into the leather, "And the mother shall cleave unto the son." Local folklore grew teeth after that. They said if you stood on the Hale property after sundown, you could hear 2 people whispering in a language that wasn't words, just breathing, rhythm, and grief. Children dared each other to knock on the door that wasn't there anymore. No one ever lasted long enough to listen twice. The county's records show that the Hale farm was finally burned down by lightning in 1893, though no storm was reported that night. The flames were described as silent, bluish, almost cold, and when they sifted through the ash, they found something impossible. Ephraim's wedding band fused to another, smaller one, both melted together, both unmarked by soot. They buried the rings in the churchyard without ceremony, but the preacher who oversaw it, Reverend Stokes' son, later confessed he'd had a dream that night. He said he saw Ephraim kneeling by his mother's grave, whispering, "We were one before the blood, we'll be one after it." Decades passed, and the name Hale became a whisper carried only by the oldest tongues. but the earth never quite forgot. The land where their house once stood refused to grow anything, grass withered, animals avoided it, and every attempt at planting ended in silence. By the early 1900s, the locals had begun calling it Mother's Acre. In 1924, a surveyor named Thomas Avery came to chart the old farm boundaries for the county. He wasn't a superstitious man. He camped there 3 nights and wrote in his journal each evening. The first entry described the stillness. The second noted the sounds, footsteps around his tent, though he saw no one. The third entry stopped halfway through a sentence. His belongings were found intact, but Thomas was gone. Only his journal remained, the ink on the last page smeared by what looked like rain, though no rain had fallen that week. The final line read, "She's asking where her son has gone." By then, the legend had begun to spread beyond the county. College professors, occultists, even amateur historians made pilgrimages to Beautort, searching for the truth behind the rumor. But the truth never let them leave unchanged. One researcher from Richmond reportedly brought home a piece of charred wood from the Hale Foundation. He died within the year. His final words to his wife, "She's in the walls." Every generation since has tried to bury the story, but it always rises again, through a letter, a misplaced deed, a whispered confession. Some say Ephraim's writings survived, hidden in a church attic, pages too fragile to open. One archivist who handled them claimed he saw handwriting that seemed to shift as he read it, as though 2 people were writing in the same body. The locals believe that's the curse, not the marriage, not the death, but the memory itself, that if you speak the Hales' names aloud, even in passing, you invite them to finish their story through you. So the town learned to forget, but forgetting doesn't mean peace. Even now, when the mist rolls down from the ridge and the crickets fall quiet, people still see a faint light on the hill where the Hale house once stood. 2 shadows facing each other, waiting. In time, the world forgot the Hales, but the story waited, patient, buried in courthouse drawers and brittle paper. Then, in 1957, a construction crew widening the county road uncovered a foundation of old stone. Beneath it, they found glass, ash, and a rusted locket containing 2 locks of hair, one gray, one dark brown. The foreman sent it to the local museum, but within a week, the exhibit was closed for maintenance. It never reopened. The building burned the following winter, no cause determined. What remained of the Hale estate was finally sold off in parcels. Families built houses nearby, careful never to cross the old boundary line. And yet strange things began again. Children woke speaking names their parents didn't know. A woman saw her reflection in the window move when she stood still. A man plowing his field found his horse frozen, eyes wide, as if it had seen someone standing behind him. By the 1970s, locals said the land itself had started whispering again, a dull hum that came from nowhere, rising through the soil at night. A few recorded it on cassette, thin, rhythmic breathing under the static. One tape examined years later revealed something else, a faint voice layered beneath the noise repeating the words, "My son, my husband." Some thought it was a hoax, others didn't. A historian from Charlottesville, Dr. Ruth Ellison, spent 10 years gathering what little could still be verified: court transcripts, land records, family Bibles, fragments of burnt paper recovered from the ruins. She concluded that Ephraim and Mary's marriage did happen, witnessed and recorded, though the license itself had vanished. Her final note before her death reads simply, "I think he believed he could undo death. That's what he wanted, to become both the father and the son." The Hale story is more than scandal. It's the portrait of a man who couldn't let go and a woman who couldn't leave. A family so desperate to preserve its bloodline that it drowned in it. And maybe that's why it still lingers, not as a ghost, but as a warning, because the soil of Virginia holds more than bones. It holds memory, and memory doesn't rest, it feeds. Some nights, if the wind's right and the moon is low, people still claim to hear a man's voice out there, softly calling a single name, and something older answering back. They say time buries everything, but it doesn't. It just changes the way we hear the cries. Today, the Hale land is nothing more than a stretch of highway shoulder and forest, but truckers passing through still slow down when the fog thickens. One driver swore he saw an old woman standing by the guardrail in the dead of night, barefoot, her hands clasped as if in prayer. When he stopped, she was gone, but the air smelled like wood smoke and rain. On his windshield, written in condensation, was one word, home. In the decades since, historians have tried to sanitize the Hale story. They called it an anomaly of grief, or a misrecorded domestic arrangement. But you can't clean blood off history. You can only look at it long enough to understand how much of it is your own. Ephraim's madness wasn't born in isolation. It was born of a culture obsessed with legacy, land, and purity. A man raised to believe his name was more sacred than the truth. That's the horror beneath it all, not the act itself, but the soil that made it possible, the neighbors who looked away, the church that stayed silent, the law that found no language to condemn it. In that silence, Ephraim became something worse than a sinner. He became a mirror, and when you stare into that mirror long enough, it starts to show you more than his face. Maybe that's why people who visit the site still dream of their mothers calling to them from another room. Maybe that's why the sound of slow footsteps in an empty hallway still makes the hairs on your neck rise. Because some part of you remembers what it means to be bound by blood, by guilt, by inheritance. The Hales are gone, their house is gone, but the story isn't. It lingers in the archives, in the soil, in the way people flinch at the idea of family secrets too old to speak. So if you ever find yourself driving through Bottort County, and you see the fog rise sudden and thick, don't stop. Don't look toward the trees, because sometimes the past isn't dead. It's waiting for someone to remember its name, and now you have.